when board member Linda hissed, "Who invited her?" The air around the picnic tables froze. The HOA president's eyes narrowed, and before I could answer, her hand found the back of my chair again. But that night, the backyard lights flickered. Not from the storm, but from the motion sensor I'd installed. Because this time, I had witnesses. This time, I wasn't the one being cornered. My name is Emily Harper and I am 32 years old. For the last 2 of those years, I had been a ghost to my own neighborhood, a name mentioned in passing in the HOA minutes, if at all. Returning was like driving toward a shoreline you knew was ravaged by the rule enforcement hurricane you'd barely survived. The air itself felt different, heavy with the scent of perfectly trimmed grass. Exactly 3 inches or face a $50 fine, and unspoken violation notices. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street of Pinewood Estates, the houses were the same. Neat suburban boxes with manicured lawns and cheerful flower beds that belied the quiet desperation within. My house, now under the thumb of the Pinewood Estates HOA, was at the end of the cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial with pristine white siding and black shutters, looking like a postcard from a life the board had tried to erase with their absurd regulations. The early summer evening was thick and humid, the kind that clings to your skin. The scent of cut grass and blooming hydrangeas mingled with the more immediate pungent smell of charcoal and grilled meat. From the street, I could hear the party before I saw it. The murmur of familiar voices punctuated by a sharp laugh, probably Linda again, in the clink of glasses. It was the sound of a neighborhood performing normally, a well-rehearsed play I had once been a part of under the strict rules of the Pinewood Estates HOA. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, the leather cool against my clammy palms. I had spent 2 years building a wall around that part of my life, brick by painful brick. Coming back felt like taking a sledgehammer to my own foundation. I parked a block away under the shade of an old oak tree and took a moment. My plan, was a cold, hard thing in my chest. It was precise, calculated, and left no room for the flood of messy emotions that threatened to surface now. The quaver in my stomach, the phantom ache in my shoulder from the stress of endless fines, the suffocating memory of a clipboard slammed on my table, pushed it all down. I was not the 30-year-old woman who had fled this neighborhood in the middle of the night with a moving truck and $2,700 in savings after the board voted to lien my house. I was a woman who had come back for a reckoning. Walking up the driveway, my heels sinking slightly into the sun-softened asphalt felt surreal. Every detail was achingly familiar yet alien. The slight crack in the 3rd concrete paver on the walkway. The way the front door was slightly off-center. The rose bushes my neighbor Sarah had babbied, their petals a riot of pink and red. I didn't go to the front door. HOA block parties were always in the backyard, a sprawling green space enclosed by a tall wooden fence, a fence I now knew intimately. As I rounded the side of the house, the scene opened up before me. String lights were draped between the posts of the back deck, casting a warm golden glow on the 20 or so people scattered across the lawn. Kids from the neighborhood were chasing fireflies near the property line, their high-pitched shrieks briefly cutting through the adult chatter. Linda was indeed manning the grill, a stained apron over her polo shirt, flipping burgers with theatrical flair. Sarah was flitting between groups, a plate of appetizers in her hand, her smile stretched just a little too tight, a familiar tell I could spot from 100 yards away. And there, holding court by the drink cooler, was Karen Thompson. She hadn't changed. Same tight bun, same barrel chest straining the fabric of her embroidered HOA president polo. Same easy, confident posture of a woman who owned everything she surveyed, including the neighborhood covenants she rewrote on a whim. The laughter and conversation, a warm and flowing river of sound, hit a dam the moment I stepped from the shadows of the house onto the grass. It didn't stop all at once. It was more like a slow creeping freeze. One neighbor saw me. His eyes widened, and he fell silent. Then his wife turned, her smile faltering. The silence spread like a contagion, a ripple effect of discomfort and shock moving through the crowd until the only sounds left were the sizzling of the grill and the distant whine of cicadas. Every eye turned to me. I felt like an actor who had walked onto the wrong stage into the wrong play. Sarah froze mid-step, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, a flicker of hope, and a deep gut-wrenching fear. Her gaze darted immediately to Karen, but it was Linda who spoke. Her voice a sharp, venomous hiss that cut through the thick air. She was sitting at the main patio table, a half-empty glass of Chardonnay in her hand, her face pinched with disapproval. She set her glass down with a deliberate click. Who invited her? The question hung in the air. An indictment. It wasn't just a question. It was a judgment. It said, "You are not welcome here. You are the disruption. You are the problem." Sarah's smile was a desperate, crumbling thing. "Linda, please," she whispered. But the words were lost, swallowed by the suffocating tension. She took a half-step toward me, then stopped, trapped by the invisible leash Karen held. Karen hadn't moved, but her presence dominated the entire yard. She slowly turned her head, her eyes small and dark, fixing on me. She took a long, slow sip of her iced tea, then lowered the glass, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. She was enjoying this, the power she had to command a neighborhood with a single glance, to turn a community celebration into a public trial. "Good to see you survived, dear," she said, her voice a low rumble laced with undisguised mockery. The word survived was a deliberate choice, a sharp poison dart aimed right at the heart of the past. She was reminding me and everyone else that she was the victor, that she was the one who remained while I was the one who had been fined into near bankruptcy and cast out. No one else spoke. My neighbors shuffled their feet, suddenly finding the grass at their shoes fascinating. Their silence was its own form of violence, a complicity I had known my entire time in Pinewood Estates. They were bystanders then, and they were bystanders now. I met Karen's gaze, holding it steady. The scared homeowner inside me wanted to shrink, to apologize, to run, but I wasn't her anymore. I was here for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with forgiveness or reconciliation. My eyes drifted from her face past the silent staring residents to the far western corner of the yard, to the tall privacy fence that separated the property from the woods beyond. And there, nestled discreetly near the top of a fence post, almost invisible in the deepening twilight, was a small dark lens. Just below it, a tiny red light blinked once, a steady rhythmic pulse. The motion sensor. My motion sensor. It was working. It was watching. No one else knew it was there. They didn't know I had spent 3 weekends pretending to volunteer for the Pinewood Community Safety Initiative, offering free security assessments to the whole neighborhood. They didn't know I had used that excuse to map out every blind spot, every angle. They didn't know that my return wasn't a surrender. It was an ambush. Karen thought she was the predator, that this was her territory. She had no idea the hunter had just walked into the trap. I took a slow, deep breath, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and betrayal. The warm glow of the party lights felt cold on my skin. The moment was coming. The script had been written 2 years ago in violation notices and public shaming. Tonight, I was just here to film the final scene. The years of silence had a sound of their own. It was the low hum of a refrigerator in a one-room apartment, the hiss of late-night traffic on a wet street, the sharp clatter of plates in a restaurant kitchen where I worked 60 hours a week just to pay the HOA liens Karen had slapped on my house. It was the sound of a life being lived in the margins, deliberately and defiantly separate from the neighborhood I had escaped. Standing there in the golden glow of the party lights, with Karen's taunt hanging in the air, those silent years roared back to life in my memory, as precise and ordered as exhibits in a courtroom. I left Pinewood 2 weeks after the board voted to place a second lien on my property. It wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled departure. It was a quiet extraction in the dead of night. She had cornered me in my own driveway that evening, her breath sour with power, her bulk blocking out the light from the street lamp. It was over something trivial. I had left my trash can out 5 minutes past the allowed time. Her rage, however, was never proportional. Her hand, thick and calloused from years of gripping that clipboard, had closed around my arm. It wasn't the first time, but something in her eyes that night was different, colder. She'd leaned in close, her voice a gravelly whisper against my ear. "One of these days, you'll push me too far, and I'll fine you until you lose this house. No one will even think to look at the paperwork." She smiled then, a tight, thin-lipped expression of absolute power. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I had learned that stillness was the only defense, a lesson taught in violation letters and choked back sobs. I simply waited for her to release me, and when she did, I walked inside, locked the door, and began to pack. Before I left, I tried to tell Sarah. I found her in her kitchen washing dishes, her back to me. I stood in the doorway, my voice barely a whisper, and laid out the facts, the endless fines, the threats, the way Karen looked at anyone who questioned a rule. I told her about the driveway, about the lien. I expected shock, anger, protection. What I received was a silence that was somehow more violent than Karen's rage. She kept washing the same plate, scrubbing it over and over. Finally, she turned off the water, dried her hands meticulously on a dish towel, and faced me. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. They were fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "She's just strict, Emily. The HOA keeps property values up. You provoke her. You always know which buttons to push." That was it. The moment the world fractured, it wasn't just a denial. It was a verdict. I was the guilty one, the instigator. My pain was my own fault. I looked at the woman who had once been my closest neighbor, who had once helped me plant those hydrangeas. And I saw a stranger, a hostage who had come to love her captor. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. And a few hours later, out of that neighborhood forever. The first few years were a blur of exhaustion. I abandoned my plans for a quiet suburban life, taking a waitressing job at an all-night diner 2 towns over. I learned to live on caffeine and cheap tips, to sleep on a lumpy mattress that smelled of dust and other people's lives. I built a fortress of solitude around myself. No close friends, no serious relationships. Intimacy felt like a liability, a weakness that could be exploited by another clipboard-wielding tyrant. I was surviving but not living. Meanwhile, news of my old life would trickle in through reluctant neighbors or old HOA meeting recaps posted online. Karen's little fiefdom, a small 2-person board when she first seized control, was growing. She was landing bigger enforcement contracts, her face occasionally appearing in the local paper, shaking hands with the mayor, sponsoring a little league team. She was building a reputation as a pillar of the community, a self-made neighborhood savior. And then came the final brutal stroke of her victory a year after I left. She pushed through a new covenant that let the board place liens on any home for aesthetic violations. She owned the rules. She owned the fear. She had erased every last trace of dissent and of me. I tried to forget. I moved to a different city, got a better job managing a bar, even started taking a few online classes. I told myself that the past was a closed file, locked away in a cabinet in my mind, but some evidence you can't file away. There was a scar, opale, jagged crescent on my left shoulder blade, a permanent souvenir from the day she had accidentally backed her golf cart into me during a compliance inspection. Most days I didn't think about it. but sometimes catching a glimpse of it in the mirror after a shower, the memory would flash back with perfect horrifying clarity. The splintering sound of the wood, the searing pain, the way she stood over me and said, "Happy Compliance Day." The scar was a part of my story, a story I had never told anyone. It was a constant silent testament to the truth. And then 3 months ago, the past refused to stay buried. An email arrived in my inbox. The sender was an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was a single chilling question. "Do you remember?" I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made me open it. The body of the email contained only one sentence. "She's hurting someone else." Below the text was an attachment. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. It was a photograph, grainy and obviously taken in secret. It showed a young woman's mailbox with a bright blue flag, violating the only white mailboxes allowed rule. Around her wrist was a dark, ugly bruise. The distinct 5-fingered pattern a perfect match to the ghosts on my own skin. She looked young, maybe 19 or 20. In the background, out of focus, I could see Karen's signature red HOA golf cart. My blood went cold. This wasn't a memory. This was happening now. She hadn't changed. She hadn't stopped. She had just found a new target. Someone else to silence. Someone else to blame. All the walls I had so carefully constructed over a decade crumbled in that single moment. The silence I had maintained, the distance I had created, it had not been a victory. It had been a retreat. And in my absence, she had been allowed to thrive, to continue her reign of terror unchecked. The file in my mind wasn't closed. It had just been waiting for new evidence. And this picture was it. It was proof. The years of silence were over. My silence and hers. Back in the suffocating humidity of the party, I met Karen's smirk with a placid calm that I did not feel. Her words, "Good to see you survived," echoed in my head, but they were drowned out by the memory of Sarah's voice. "You provoke her," and the sight of that ugly bruise on a stranger's wrist. She thought this was her stage, her audience, her victory lap. She had no idea she was just an actor, and I was the director, and I had already set the scene for her final performance. The first step in any operation is to assess the established channels. My first call after staring at the photograph for what felt like a lifetime was to the local police department. I went in person the next day, a folder in my hand containing a printed copy of the email and the image. My statement written out in clear, concise language. I sat across from a Sergeant Miller, a man with a tired face and a coffee-stained mustache in a small airless office that smelled of paperwork and indifference. He listened with a practiced patience, his eyes scanning my statement without really reading it. He looked at the photo, turning it over as if something might be written on the back. "An anonymous email," he said, his voice flat, "sent from an encrypted address. Ma'am, for all we know, this could be a prank. A doctored photo. It's her golf cart in the background," I insisted, my voice colder than I intended. "And that bruise, it's a pattern I recognize." He leaned back, the springs of his chair groaning in protest. "Karen Thompson is a respected member of this community. She's on the town planning board. She donates to the Police Benevolent Fund every year. We can't launch an investigation based on a picture sent by a ghost. We need more than that. We need concrete evidence. A witness who's willing to come forward. A formal complaint." He looked at me, a flicker of something, pity or maybe just annoyance, in his eyes. "Are you a disgruntled former resident, Ms. Harper?" "We get those sometimes." The dismissal was absolute. I was not a credible source. I was a potential problem. Karen's carefully constructed public image was a shield no anonymous email could pierce. I was on my own. I thanked the sergeant for his time, walked out of the station into the bright, indifferent sunlight, and felt the last bit of faith I had in the system evaporate. The operation would proceed, but it would be my own. Objective: acquire incontrovertible proof. The next 2 months were a study in logistics and deception. My nights were spent in the blue glow of my laptop screen, a digital warrior preparing her arsenal. I researched surveillance technology with the intensity of a doctoral student, becoming an expert on things I never thought I'd need to know. Megapixel resolution, infrared night vision capabilities, motion detection sensitivity, and data encryption protocols. I didn't want a simple security camera. I needed a silent, invisible witness. I settled on a set of 4 military-grade microcameras. They were wireless, weatherproof, had a 6-month battery life, and were disguised as ordinary objects: a screw head, a landscape rock, a common electrical outlet cover. They recorded in 4K video and audio, and streamed the encrypted feed directly to a secure cloud server I could access from anywhere. The price was steep, but justice, I was learning, was not cheap. The next phase was infiltration. I couldn't just show up and start planting cameras. I needed a legend, a believable cover story. I created the Pinewood Community Safety Initiative. I spent a weekend designing a simple, professional-looking website with stock photos of smiling families and articles about deterring burglaries. I printed flyers on thick, glossy paper. My new persona was a concerned former resident, giving back to the community by offering free home security consultations. It was audacious, but the suburbs run on a currency of perceived safety and neighborly concern. I started at the far end of the street, going door to door. I was polite, professional, and convincing. Most people declined, but a few, including the elderly couple 2 doors down from Sarah, agreed enthusiastically. This was crucial. It made my presence in the neighborhood legitimate. When I finally knocked on Sarah's door, my heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. She was shocked to see me, her hand flying to her mouth. I played my part, offering a hesitant smile and the flyer. I told her I was in town for this project, that I'd been thinking about her, about how exposed the back of her property was to the woods. I offered to install a few motion sensors and cameras just for peace of mind. Karen was there, of course. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She listened to my pitch, a sneer playing on her lips. When I was done, she laughed, a short barking sound. "She's always dramatic," she said to Sarah as if I wasn't there. "Always making a big show out of nothing." But she didn't say no. In her world, I was a broken thing. My grand dramatic gesture was to her just another pathetic cry for attention. She saw no threat. She saw a nuisance. She waved a dismissive hand and went back to her clipboard. That was her mistake. She underestimated me. The installation took 2 days. Under the guise of checking sight lines and signal strength, I placed my witnesses with surgical precision. One camera, disguised as a bolt head, went into the fence post overlooking the entire backyard and deck. The second, the landscape rock, was nestled in the hydrangeas Sarah loved, aimed directly at the back door. The third was inside the garage, the outlet cover offering a view of her precious golf cart and the tools she was so proud of. The final one was the riskiest, the screw head placed in the trim of the hallway that led to the community bulletin board. I felt a cold sweat on my neck as I drilled the pilot hole. Karen's laughter from the living room echoing behind me. With the hardware in place, it was time for the final, most disgusting part of the plan, the charm offensive. I had to get inside. I called Sarah a week later, my voice thick with practiced regret. I told her I was sorry for the years of silence, that I missed the neighborhood, that I wanted to try and fix things. She cried. Of course, her relief was a palpable thing, a desperate, hungry need to believe the community could be whole again. She was my easiest mark, and the guilt of it was a bitter acid in my throat. I brought gifts. A pecan pie from a bakery she liked. Expensive wine for Karen. I sat in their living room, the one I had fled so many years ago, and I smiled. I asked about her enforcement quotas. I complimented Sarah's garden. I played the part of the prodigal resident. Returned to the fold. Karen watched me, her eyes like chips of flint. But my performance was flawless. My apology, my submission, my apparent defeat. It all fed her massive ego. A broken-down girl with a silly security project and a peace offering of pie was no threat. She agreed to let me attend the annual block party for Linda's birthday. I was no longer a threat. I was a novelty. Harmless. She didn't know that every moment I was in that house. My phone was in my pocket, tethered to the Wi-Fi I had just reconnected to, testing the signal strength of my hidden network. She didn't know that my car, a nondescript sedan parked a block away, was my mobile command center. She didn't know that on the passenger seat sat a laptop screen alive with 4 silent high-definition video feeds watching her every move. The backyard, the garage, the hallway. The trap was set. The bait was me. I had created the perfect sterile environment for a predator to reveal her nature. All the variables were controlled. The stage was lit. The witnesses were in place. Their digital eyes unblinking. All I needed was the trigger. I just needed her to do what she always did. I just needed her to enforce one more time. The air at the dinner table was a tight, invisible membrane stretched to its breaking point. We were all playing our parts in a desperate pantomime of community. My neighbors discussed property taxes. Linda recounted a tedious story about her golf game, and Sarah fluttered about her anxiety manifesting as an obsessive need to keep everyone's wine glass full. Every word spoken was a careful step around the landmine of my presence. They spoke of everything except the last 2 years. Of everything except why I was really here. I ate my potato salad in small, measured bites, a silent observer watching the performance. I could feel Karen's eyes on me from the head of the table. She wasn't participating in the chatter. She was watching, waiting, nursing her iced tea like it was a weapon. The sun had dipped below the treeline, and the string lights now provided the primary illumination, casting long, dancing shadows across our faces. A lull fell over the table, one of those awkward silences where the only sound is the clinking of silverware. It was the opening Linda had been waiting for. She set her fork down, the tines clicking loudly against her plate. She had been refilling her Chardonnay with a liberal hand all evening, and her face was flushed with a mixture of alcohol and long-simmering resentment. "So, Emily," she began, her voice carrying across the table with manufactured sweetness. "Still no compliance flag on your mailbox. 32 is getting up there. You know, the covenants are there for a reason." The membrane tore. Every head at the table froze, eyes darting from her to me. This was the moment the charade ended, and the real event began. Sarah's face fell. A silent "please don't" forming on her lips. I could have ignored it. I could have offered a polite, deflective answer and allowed the fragile peace to be restored. But I wasn't here for peace. I was here for war. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. I carefully placed the glass back on the table, my movements deliberate. I looked directly at Linda, whose smug smile was already anticipating her victory, and offered a small, serene smile of my own. "Still no soul?" I asked, my voice quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the humid evening air like a shard of ice. The effect was instantaneous. My neighbor choked on a piece of steak. Another's wife gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A spoon clattered against a glass. A sharp, discordant chime in the sudden, dead quiet. No one spoke. No one breathed. They just stared. Trapped between the two poles of a conflict they had spent years pretending didn't exist. Linda's face went from flushed pink to a blotchy, furious red. Karen broke the spell. She pushed her chair back slightly, the sound of wood scraping on stone, a deliberate grating noise. She reached into her shirt pocket and pulled out a cigarette and a lighter. The flick of the flint, the flare of the flame, the first long drag. It was all a piece of theater, a display of unbothered control. She exhaled a plume of gray smoke that drifted across the table, momentarily obscuring her face. "You always had that mouth," she said, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. It was a statement of fact, a diagnosis of my lifelong disease of defiance. It was what she used to say right before her temper snapped, the verbal warning before the physical storm, the memory of it, the Pavlovian fear it was meant to trigger, rose up in me, but I beat it down. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on the table. The fast, frantic drumming of my own heart was the only thing that betrayed my calm exterior. "You always had that clipboard?" I replied, my voice steady and clear. It was a direct hit, a line drawn. The subtext of 2 years of power abuse was now text, spoken aloud in front of the entire neighborhood. Sarah shot to her feet, her chair nearly toppling over. Her face was a mask of sheer panic. "Enough! Both of you," she started, her voice a frantic plea. But it was too late. Karen was already moving. She didn't stand up. She didn't need to. In one swift, brutal motion, she reached across the small space between us and grabbed the back of my chair, yanking it sideways with her full weight. The world tilted. I was thrown against the armrest. The air knocked from my lungs. My glass of red wine full to the brim thanks to Sarah tipped over, its contents splashing across the front of my white summer dress in a dark arterial stain. The shock of the cold liquid was a jolt, but the violence of the action was a familiar, sickening lurch in my gut. Gasps rippled around the table. Sarah cried out my name, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself, the wood digging into my palms. Slowly, deliberately, I righted myself. I didn't look at the stain. I didn't look at Sarah or my horrified neighbors. I lifted my head and looked directly into her eyes, and I did not look away. I held her furious, hateful gaze, my own expression unreadable, a silent challenge. "Go on. Finish it." And in that supercharged silent moment, a familiar click echoed from the corner of the yard. A clean white light flooded the patio, sharp and sudden, chasing away the soft, forgiving glow of the party lights. It bleached the color from every face, turning the scene into a stark, overexposed photograph. The motion sensor on the west fence post had activated. The backyard lights were on. The sound was almost imperceptible under the sudden wash of harsh white light, but to me it was as loud as a gunshot. It was a tiny mechanical click. The motion sensor had done its job, and in response, the camera in the fence post had switched from low-power standby to its active recording protocol. Its internal buffer was now streaming a 4K 30 frames per second video file, complete with high-fidelity audio to the secure cloud server. The digital eye was open and it was unblinking. The trap was sprung. Karen was momentarily blinded by the floodlight, her face a mask of rage caught in a sudden spotlight. She didn't notice the click. She didn't see the tiny lens. Her entire world had contracted to the space between us, to the challenge in my eyes, to the defiant set of my jaw. My spoken words, "You always had that clipboard," had bypassed her brain and gone straight to her muscles. It was an old familiar circuit. Defiance met with force. Question met with fist. Her hand came up so fast the air seemed to split. It wasn't a push or a shove. It was a full-bodied, open-palmed strike executed with the practiced efficiency of a woman who knows how to use her authority. The sound of it, a sharp, wet crack, echoed across the suddenly silent yard. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying, the the force of the blow radiating from my cheek down into my jaw and neck. For a split second, the world went white with a burst of static, and the taste of blood, coppery and sharp, filled my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. The collective gasp from the neighborhood was a physical thing, a sudden vacuum of air. Sarah let out a high, keening shriek, a sound of pure animal terror that she had suppressed for years. I heard the scrape of chairs, the clatter of a fork, and then a loud crash as a plate laden with half-eaten food slid from the table and shattered on the stone patio. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Linda stumbling backward, her face a pale, slack-jawed mask of shock, the Chardonnay forgotten. The party was over. The ringing in my ears slowly subsided, replaced by the thumping of my own heart. The steady, powerful beat. The pain began to bloom on my face, a hot, throbbing fire. But beneath the pain, there was a layer of ice. I was not the 30-year-old woman anymore. I was a data analyst, and this was the primary data point I had come to collect. I methodically cataloged the event. Time of assault, 8:47 p.m. Assailant, Karen Thompson. Victim, Emily Harper. Witnesses, approximately 20 neighbors. Physical evidence. Visible contusion forming on left cheek. Minor laceration inside mouth. And most importantly, digital evidence, one pristine, unassailable video file currently being uploaded. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head back to face her. I lifted my chin, letting the harsh security light illuminate the angry red mark that was already darkening on my skin. I met her wild panting gaze. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, her fists clenched at her sides. She was expecting tears. She was expecting me to crumble, to run, to prove her right. I gave her none of it. I gave her my voice, low and steady, laced with a coldness that seemed to unnerve her more than any scream could have. "Keep going," I said, tasting the blood as I spoke. "You always finish what you start." It was a dare. It was pouring gasoline on a fire, and she was never one to back down from a dare. A low growl rumbled in her chest, and she took a step toward me, her body coiling like a predator about to spring. Sarah screamed again. "Karen, no!" But her voice was a gnat buzzing in a hurricane. Her focus was entirely on me. She was going to wipe the calm, defiant look off my face. She was going to finish it. She lunged, but just as her hands came up, a new light joined the scene. It wasn't the steady white glare of the motion sensor. It was a strobing rhythmic pulse of red and blue painting the side of the house, the fence, and the terrified faces of my neighbors in ghostly flashing colors. It was followed by a second pulse and the faint approaching wail of a siren cutting through the night. Karen froze mid-lunge, her head snapping toward the front of the house. Confusion, then dawning horror washed over her face. The predator, so sure of her territory, had just heard the click of a much larger trap. Before I had even pulled into the neighborhood that evening, I had made a call. I had spoken to the 911 dispatcher, my voice calm and controlled. I had reported a non-emergency, a request for a wellness check. I said there was a neighborhood gathering that I was concerned might escalate given a history of volatility. I gave them the address and a time. I told them that if they didn't hear from me by 8:50 p.m., they should consider it an active disturbance. It was 8:49. Two uniformed officers appeared at the gate to the backyard, their silhouettes stark against the flashing lights of their patrol cars. They were calm, professional, their eyes scanning the scene, taking in the shattered plate, Sarah's terrified face, the dark red stain on my dress, the fresh livid mark on my cheek, and Karen frozen in a posture of aggression. "What's going on here?" the first officer asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Karen's composure snapped back into place with the force of a slammed door. Her entire demeanor shifted from predator to victim. She straightened up, holding her hands out in a gesture of placation. Her voice was a raw, pleading bellow of indignation. "Thank God you're here, officers," she boomed. "She came here after 2 years, started insulting everyone, making a scene. She's unstable. She provoked me. It was her mantra, her shield. She provoked me." The words Sarah had used, the words that had exonerated her in her own mind for years. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face a mask of righteous anger. The rest of the neighborhood stood like statues, silent, terrified witnesses, their complicity hanging in the air. The officer looked from Karen's furious face to my calm one. He looked at the bruise. His expression was neutral, betraying nothing. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I simply held the officer's gaze, and then with a slow, deliberate movement, I lifted my hand and pointed, not at Karen, not at my own face. I pointed past her toward the dark wooden fence post standing sentinel in the corner of the yard. "The camera's right there," I said, my voice clear and even. "It saw everything.